the Leil of Yud Bet.
It's facing the wrong way.
Okay, there must be a little thingy there.
There we go.
Okay, so good evening, everyone. We're live in Efrat and Leil Yud Bet Kislev, the Yahrzeit of the Bat Ayin, of Avram Dov of Averich. He is buried in Tzfat. He was known to be a Poel Yeshuot. He was known to do many, many nisim. And we're going to learn Drush Yud Bet of the Zera Shimshon. Tonight, B'schut, the Bat Ayin, we're going to have, hopefully we'll try to integrate a lot of the Torahs of the Bat Ayin as we're learning. But either which way, I learned this piece last year. I still am fascinated by it. I learned it again on Tuesday night with a chavruta. And when I read it over with him, and we learned it over, and I was fascinated by it again. And what happens is when you look at it here in this week's parsha, you're like, okay, it's nice. And then he gives you references at the end. He refers to another place where the same kind of idea, and he even quotes the same midrashim later in a different parsha earlier on. And then it really brings everything to light. So hopefully, Bezrat Hashem will be able to get everythhin together.
So we're going about Vayishlach Yud Bet.
Vayishlach, Parak Drush Yud Bet. It's on Daf Shin Ayin Dalid in the blue Sfarim. So it says Midrash Rabbah. We know this is right after. If I'm not mistaken, what is this? This is Gimel. Sorry, I'm just going to go to the right place. Yes, yep, you bet. So he goes to that's Gimel. Okay, so here Yaakov. Gimel, sorry, Gimel Kaf. Okay, so here Yaakov is. This is right after he meets Esav. He finishes with he's finished meeting Esav, and he moves to this area near Shechem, where Bnei Shechem, where Shechem lives. What the Zera Shimshon is going to do is he's going to connect what happened before and what happens later, meaning this is like the transition between what just happened with Esav and what's about to happen with Dinah. So he says, "Vayikra lo El Elohei Yisrael." The Midrash says that, what does that mean? Rav Huna b'shem Rav Lakish Amar. Rav Huna says in the name of Rav Lakish, Afilu Chazan HaKnesset, no notel svaral atzmo. He says, even the Chazan, in this case, the Chazan HaKnesset does not mean, it used to be the Chazan was more of like a gabai, meaning the person was like just helped around. In this case, the Chazan is actually the Chazan, like what we know today, the Chazan. He says, you shouldn't take pride in yourself. In other words, you shouldn't take the power, or you shouldn't take the power shouldn't go to your head, right? And you, as he's talking about Yaakov, says you took the power, you took it to your head. Meaning, you look at what he calls the name of the place, El Elohei Yisrael, right? So it sounds like the way I read it and the way you would read it is his name. He says El Elohei, the God of Yisrael, meaning me, right? So he says, you took the power, you said you named the place after yourself. Tomorrow, your daughter is going to be handled inappropriately. Mitana means violated. The next pasuk, meaning literally the next pasuk, after that is Dinah goes out and does what, and then the story unfolds.
So he connects between
what the name, right? Exactly.
That was a punishment almost.
He's going to say it's going to be a midah keneged midah. You're going to see in a second. So he says, you're good, very good. So he says here. So what the Yefei Torah says, the Yefei Torah who lived in the 1500s, he was a rav in Turkey, appropriately. So he says, what's the connection between the fact that he called the name El Elohei Yisrael and the Chazan? What do we have to talk about? Why are we talking about Chazan of Beit Knesset, Dinah? Like he says, what's the connection here? Uvemet, Zamidrash tzarich bi, or Lamu tzarich likacha mashal Chazan Knesset. Like why do we have to bring the Chazan at all? Right? So the Zera Shimshon is just adding to the Yefei Torah's question. He's saying I don't get the connection at all. It makes no sense. Like many times his questions are just very basic, saying I don't understand the Midrash, and that's what he's saying here. And then both things basically what had to do is now they have this situation of Gilgulim. So now you have the issue of where that the Terach's children, Terach and his wife, had to kind of go through some sort of Gilgulim to kind of a detox, right? Exactly, detox. Terach be'Iyov. Terach went to Iyov. The Arizal mentions that several times that Terach and Iyov were Gilgulim of each other, or Iyov was a Gilgul of Terach. And he says that through Iyov's suffering, through the fact that he went through so much suffering, as we know, right? So therefore, it kind of cleansed all the issues and contaminations that would happen. Now here he says something beautiful. Right, he says here, V'hainu nida shenebcha ledina. Right, he said, look, he says, so he says, what he says, nida nitabcha ledina. Every time I read that, I'm like, why didn't I think of that? Like, it's such an obvious thing. Turn that to dina, right? It's such an obvious thing.
Was a virgin when she was
Yeah, no, but the point is that he's going to say in a second, watch what happens here. He says, Kshabash chem al dina, sha'av mimena kol hazuma shel nida. All the tumah, Shem took out all the tumah from her into him. And as it says, right, so now based on this idea, based on this, again, it's Kabbalah, I don't understand all of it, but we now understand that by what happened is, by most people, when we read the story of Dinah, we say, it was unbelievable, it's inappropriate, all these things, it doesn't work out, it doesn't make sense. But what we're trying to get to here is go back to what Hashem told Yaakov, and what Hashem rebuked Yaakov for saying is, people will misinterpret what happened. But you said, El Elohei Yisrael, this is where you have to go back to what we said originally. Hashem told Yaakov, you can't say that. It sounds selfish, it sounds pretentious. So Hashem says, you don't understand. The story with Dinah, most people understand it as a story that didn't have a good ending. What we have to say is, no, it had a good, according to this interpretation, Al-Pi Kabbalah, he says that there was some sort of benefit out. Dinah became purified, meaning that her soul that was up until now a little contaminated by what was going on beforehand, it wasn't actually an unfortunate situation. Yes, we read it that way, but we could be interpreted a different way. Most people would hear it and say Dinah was contaminated and it was important. But if we read it according to this understanding, we could say that she was indeed purified. We can actually say that everything was actually because Shem pulled out all the tumah from her. Not that it sounds strange to say that, but we look through history, most of the stories of Yehuda, what happens with Yehuda and Tamar? Yehuda and Tamar also was not inappropriate relationship. These inappropriate things are read inappropriately, meaning we read them in a way that say, that doesn't sound good. But then what happens? What happens comes out of Yehuda? David. What happens with, what else? We have...
everything in the whole Davidic line.
Exactly. Everything with David HaMelech comes out of these stories.
Comes from
Right. Well, exactly. It comes from Lod, whatever. All these, right. Exactly. All these stories come out from these very strange, and again, to the regular person, it reads as this is inappropriate. There's something wrong with it, or whatever. But we have to dig deeper, and we have to say maybe there's something better. That maybe something pure that's coming out of it. And this is what he's saying here. And he says, and he says, and that's what happens when we read later on. That if we read in Vayikra, it says that was placed on. Basically, he's saying is that the nidata, her nidah, her impurity becomes and fell upon Shem. This is the same thing. If we know about the Seir Lazazel, and he mentions this in Vayishlach. He mentions this earlier in Drush Dalet. He mentions the idea that why did Yaakov have to appease Esav? Why do you have to give him a bracha at all?
Because he took away
his brachot, right? So he says that right. So he says so that's one reason, and he says also on Yom Kippur, what do? We give a Seir Lazazel. Seir Lazazel is to be given. So in order for the other side not to say, wait a minute, you're trying to get kapara, but I can give all the things about Am Yisrael that are not so good. Meaning, all I need is give me 5 minutes and I'll tell you everything you need. Right? So Hashem says, no problem. We'll give one Seir Lazazel to appease them. Right? And it's the same idea. Right? We need to appease the other side to make sure that we don't get them angry. So he says here, V'hi na'asa nikiyah. She becomes V'shimshon, and then he says, so Dinah becomes pure. V'shimshon shenitgala lo hasad. Shimon, not Shimshon. Shimon. Understood this? Shimon. What happened to Shimon? What happened to Shimon and Dinah?
Well, Shimon, when they killed the whole Shem.
And then what happened with the Dinah?
I think he took her upon him.
Shimon married her.
That's what I'm saying.
Right, according to I never knew this till, right, until when I learned this on Tuesday, or actually on Monday. When I learned on Monday,
Because she was basically
Rashi-
no one would marry her or something
right?
like that.
Actually, Rashi quotes this.
Jacob was very upset about it altogether.
Right, so Rashi quotes it when Rashi at the end of Parshat, he says it in Parshat. Says it here in Parshat. He says it, yeah.
By the way, I checked into it while you're looking.
Yeah.
He said, "Chidat habe chakim," you call
Hakim, right.
so that's it. Arum, you call it. So
Right, so there is something to be said there.
Yeah.
So he says here, so Rashi says in Parshat Vayigash, when we're talking about who are the names, who are the children of, Reuven, Shimon, whatever it is, and it says, V'Shaul ben
Ben
HaKananit.
Aknanit.
And so there,
Kananit is
Rashi says, what does Rashi say?
Dinah.
Ben Dinah, Shenivala l'Chna'ani, she was, right, there was a child that happened. Kshargu et Shechem, lo hayta Dinah rotza latzeit, ad shenishba la Shimon sheyisa'ena. Right, so he says Shimon swore, because of course Dinah doesn't want to go out and be embarrassed. So Shimon swore, saying, from now on, I'm gonna marry you.
Now, who was she daughter of?
Who? Dinah. Dinah was a daughter of Elishma bnei Leah.
And so was Shimon.
Shimon. Shimon.
Or
Yeah.
was he?
No, Shimon was definitely there. Dinah.
Al pi apshat, they're both like-
At Piyapshat, they're siblings.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm saying, I'm just asking.
Yeah. Okay. So it could be again. Could be. Anyway. So we're going. So what he's saying here is, according to the Zera Shimshon, he's saying is that the first part is that El Elohei Yisrael comes again. Yaakov could be seen, or it could be Hashem rebuked Yaakov for saying that El Elohei Yisrael could be sounding pretentious against Yaakov, meaning that Yaakov was saying it's all about me, Rav Gav Tanut, and it's not. Yaakov didn't mean that at all. Yaakov meant something else. But Hashem said most people will misunderstand what you're saying.
Those people, us reading it.
Yeah, exactly. That's what he's saying. So he says, now look what he says. Right? Okay, so he says, just like Yaakov sinned in the eyes of those who heard him call it El Elohei Yisrael, so too, Dinah, right? Bito lo nitma elo bein hashemim. So too, the punishment was that Dinah, his daughter, was contaminated only the guys who heard about the incident. Meaning, as appears to people onlooking, they say, "Wait, this something didn't happen. This is not correct." But to some people, there's actually a deeper understanding, saying, "Well, maybe there was something that actually was good came out of this." Now, it's hard to understand that when we're looking at things, but when we look at things, we have to understand. There's a famous story. I think it's about Rav LeMizvot of Zhensk. So I think. Yeah, it's a Hasidic story, but he says like everything. I think there was Rav LeMizvot saying that he was saying how everything is bad. Everything was bad down on earth. Everything was bad. There was famine. There was plagues. Whatever was going on. So he goes into the field. He goes into the forest and he davens. He says, "I can't get it. I don't understand. Everything's bad." And I think it was the Baal Shem Tov who came to him and said, From up here, meaning after he's dead, or he looked up in Shema, he says, up here, it all looks good. In other words, it's hard for us when we're looking at things this way, right? The grass is green, right? So that I once heard when we say, what do we say? When we're looking at things from a very narrow, narrow, right? When a narrow vision, things don't look so good. But we ask Hashem that Anani, we want to get answered so I can see the full picture. Right, so when we look at things, when we're outside of things a little bit more, and we see the wider picture, we say, "Oh, that was a little bit, there's something, there's a little bit of there's a light across the whole thing, and we can understand it." Now if we look here,
So there's a medrash, I think there's no source of medrash.
that
But there's a famous medrash that if you want something from Hashem says to you,
Right. Right, yeah, exactly. So if you just open a little bit, if you just Right, that's right. So exactly the same idea. So now what he says here. So this says is that the whole idea here is, it's interesting that I didn't look at it the last time, or should have looked at it in the previous Parshat Vayishlach. But anyway, I'll bring the proof or the storyline of that I'm saying here with Yaakov and how Yaakov and Hashem kind of rebukes Yaakov. If we go to Parshat Vayishlach, at least it's just Yud Chet. If we go there for a second, I don't know what page is there. But if we go to, Okay, so it says, Vantabi tzikati. So there, the Midrash quotes, and this again, it's a fascinating Midrash because again, same thing, same question. He asks the same exact question. He says, Midrash Rabbah, Vantabi tzikati, Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu Yaakov, Vantabi tzikati, Chayecha lemachar bitcha yotzeit umitana. Again, same thing. So he says, is you ask my integrity. He says, Hashem, Yaakov is saying, is my integrity will be the one that, what is he, this is where Yaakov is telling Lavan, whatever animals, it's about the akudim and the vrudim and there's whatever it is. So Yaakov says, whatever animals come out of this thing, let my integrity do the work, do the talking. Not me, it's not me, just let the integrity. But what happens, right? When you make that statement before you're about to do something, what do you expect to do? Nothing, meaning you expect that you're going to be straight as an arrow, right? But what actually happens, he puts the animals, and he puts something in the animals, right? He puts that little stick in the water, it says he puts the stick in the water. Splits the stick, and whatever he does there, right? And it's perceived as maybe some trickery. Well, you can't say vantabit tzidkati, you can't say my integrity, and then all of a sudden put something in the water and make it look.
Let me ask you, when he says katonti mikol hachasadim, what does Rashi say that?
Right, so exactly. Maybe that's the chet. Maybe. Anyway, so he says, so the Zera Shimshon, almost word for word, and where is it? If he says va'anta b'tzidkati, and then the Zera Shimshon says, and according to the Midrash, tomorrow or later, because of what you said, anta b'tzidkati, later on, because you said va'anta, so now he's going to reverse the words, anta versus mitana. Mitana was what? Which means is be violated, right? So that's the midrash. And he says here, so what is the chet? And he says the same exact thing. He brings the same exact midrash, same exact amudei shiva based on the Arizal, and he says the same thing. And he says basically, he says at the end he concludes and he says mishum hachi iralo. So here he says, this is what I want to write here. So he wanted to say, Amar vantabiskati, rather let my integrity testify for what I did. Klomar, eni makpid ela shalo yeramaut etzli. He's saying is for me, he meant to say my concern is only on my part there should be no deception. Right? Meaning she'eni gonev klu mishalava. Meaning he's saying I don't want anyone to think that I stole from him. That's what he meant to say. Right? But aval im haolam yusvurim shani oseh ramaut. But if everyone thinks that I cheated, and he says, lo echpat li klal. That's what Yaakov Avinu says. And therefore he felt justified. He says, but because we have a rule that the people have to act properly in the eyes of the public, not what I do. You can't say, go, if everyone thinks that I'm, because I'm walking around. Right. Now, if I'm walking around with the purple hat and everyone's going to stare at me, right, that I can't walk around with the purple hat. Meaning it's not appropriate. You have to think about what other people think of you when you're doing what you're doing. Anyway, so he says, it says, Kedichtiv, Vitem Nikim. It says here, Kedichtiv, Vitem Nikim mi Hashem Yisrael. Efrat, he says, look what he says here. He says, it goes back to Vayetze. He says, Vifrat Adam Chashuv Ki Yaakov. He says, especially true for a person like Yaakov. Sheyesh Kitzat Chilul Hashem. Zera Shimshon, there might even be a hint of Chilul Hashem for what he just did. And he says, meaning that Hashem is telling Yaakov, you have to be extra careful. And you can't say, I don't care what other people think. People are looking at you. As Yaakov Avinu, people are looking at what you're saying. Mishum hachi iralu ma'aseh Dinah. He says, this is why what happened to Dinah happened to Dinah. And he says, "V'zeh midah kinei midah shehu lo chashuv klam la'azabriot." In others, for his sin was that he disregarded any public, when he said it for what he didn't care what other people were thinking about. What he's saying is, as long as Lavan doesn't think that I stole anything from him, I'm okay. And Hashem is telling Yaakov, no, you have to think about what other people are going to say when they say you said my integrity is going to lead, and then you start doing something in the water, right? You can't say that and go. Other people are thinking of you and looking at you. Mishum hachi na'anash. His way of thinking was punished, meaning his direction was that he didn't understand that Yaakov's idea was, again, I don't understand Yaakov, God forbid am I saying I'm having a ton against Yaakov Avinu, but at least the thought process here of the Zera Shimshon is saying is that Yaakov Avinu has this pattern of doing something where he says something that can be misinterpreted in two different ways, and one way might be viewed as okay, I understand where you're coming from. And the other way was on the other onlookers, we might say, wait a minute, that doesn't sound appropriate or doesn't sound good, and that sounds pretentious in one case, in the case of our parsha, and in the other case, it sounds like you're saying is, everyone else can go jump in a lake because my idea was this, and yet you have to be very careful. And he says, right. So he says and he says the reason why he was punished. And this is what he says in Vayetze. He says, he says, if it was not for this being a sin, meaning it would not be fitting for this kind of thing to be said against Yaakov, then the whole incident of Dinah might not have happened. Meaning, on Tabit Tzikati, he's saying, again, this is what he says here. Why should Yaakov be shamed in the public eye through the incident of Dinah if the incident itself was not necessarily bad? Meaning, what he said is not bad. It's not a bad statement. He's saying, I want my money.
It's a hectic thing to have.
Right. Eventually, he was being faulted not for not being concerned about the other.
Dinah,
right.
Like that's like another question.
What?
You could punish Yaakov himself to have Dinah.
Right, and the other question is, okay, so he punished through Dinah, but then how do you explain the other story about Yosef, and then what happens later in the next week's parsha? So there's a lot of questions you have about this whole.
If it's all like midah of trickery,
right.
then the whole trickery with Yosef is the
So interestingly, another thing that sometimes when you just like review the parsha, you kind of see things, but if you look again in this week's parsha, he mentions, where is it? We'll end with something that two things actually. So it says it's not from the Zera Shimshon at all actually, but it says Vayavo al ir betach, before he sits down, before the idea of the trickery comes back again in this week's parsha. I don't remember exactly where it is, but if we look here, Vayavo Yaakov Shalem, right, and then it says. Where is it? Oh, yeah, no, it's here. It's at the end. I think it's Vayavo al ir betach.
John, you know what's the interesting part? At the end, why is he upset with Shimon and Levi? You know this.
Because
at the end, he has to care what everyone says.
Right.
You get it?
Yes.
Why was he upset with Shimon and Levi? Not because he didn't agree with what they did.
Right.
Suddenly he was concerned. What is everyone else going to say? Maybe you should have thought about that before.
Okay, so I can't find the pasuk right now, but he says Vayavo al ir betach, and it says what kind of bitachon? You should have to have a bitachon. It says betach. There are many mefarshim who talk about bitachon here. Is that when you have the bitachon, is you have to not only to have the idea that the Yeshua is going to come, but you have to have the bitachon as if the Yeshua already happened. Meaning you have to have so strong. You can't just say that I trust Hashem is going to save me, but you have to say is that whatever happens.
Fake it till you make it.
Not even fake it till you make it. He says. It's not only that Hashem is protecting me, but you have to say is that the Yeshua is already coming through. Now, what does he say? Yaakov, he says. Now, this is a famous thing. When Yaakov and Esav are talking to each other in this week's parsha, he says, it says, Ki yesh li kol, and Yaakov says, I have everything, and Esav says, yesh li rav, right? I have almost everything. I have most things, right? And the difference between them is Yaakov says, what you can't say, Yaakov can say, how can Yaakov say, I have everything? He just literally took 10% or more than 10% of his stock and literally just gave it to Esav, right? How could he say, I have everything, right? So he says that we have to believe, right? And there's an idea of the bitachon and also in Shar bitachon of Lkovod LeMizvot. He mentions, he's saying is that if it was meant to be that I was supposed to have it, it would be in my possession. Meaning that Yaakov giving that away, he viewed it as that wasn't mine to begin with. Meaning I wasn't meant to be mine. If it was meant to be mine, I would have had it. And it's because it's not mine, I don't have it. I have everything. In fact, the Orach Chaim HaKadosh on that pasuk. And it's one of the things that I always. Right. So right. Okay. Good. So there you go. Thank you. So it says here. Look what it says here. Vayavo Yaakov Shalem. There, right after he just gave everything, he said Yesh li kol. Right. It's one of the three. Every one of the avot has a kol, bakol, mikol, kol, like we say in benching. Right. All right. So it says Vayavo Yaakov Shalem. the Orach Chaim HaKadosh says that he says that Kimasha Chiser Min Chasav Yaakov, everything that was just taken away from Yaakov, B'mincha Shonatan Esav, that he just gave Esav, Hishlim Hashem Chesrono Shechiser Min Chasav Shevi Mipadan. He literally replaced it, meaning he said, I have everything, and because he gave it to Esav, and because he said, I have everything, Hashem filled it back in, meaning he didn't lose anything, right? And he says here, that's why he says, Vayavo Yaakov Shalem, Shalem b'nechasim ki shiur ba'abo. He had everything he needed. He lost everything that was taken away, quote unquote, to give to Esav. Hashem gave back to him, right? And that's why the Yaakov, the bracha that he got that says Yeshli Kol, he gave Hashem, repaid him everything. Meaning from the moment that he left Padan Aram, from the moment he left Padan Aram with all that livestock, he gave us a lot of mincha to Esav. Even so, Hashem said, I'm repaying you everything. So that was the confidence that Yaakov had. Now, there's two small things that I want to point out to give you a little bit of a nice idea at the end. So it says here at the beginning, right? When Yaakov sends the malachim, he says the way he orders that he says. If we go to the beginning of this week's parsha, just an idea. He says, Yishlach Yaakov malachim, and he says, send Vayili Shor v'Chamor Eved v'Shivcha. According to most mefarshim, what's the most important animal? Tzon. It shouldn't be Shor v'Chamor and then Tzon. It should be Tzon first. So why does he not? So most mefarshim say the reason why he didn't start with Tzon is because he didn't want to remind Esav of what of the Gdizim. Right now, what happens after? Right. So that's like he's trying to be nice. Now what happens? And after, when he says, okay, and he brings him, and then the first gift that he actually brings. What does he bring? Izim Matayim. The first thing is Izim. So how could it be? Right? We just said, what was the first thing we just said? The first thing we just said is he didn't want to remind him of the Izim. So how could it be that now he bring the gift, the first gift he gives is Izim. So the Rabbeinu Bechai says, Rabbeinu Bechai says is the first time it was before the davening. Right? What did he do? He set up, what did he do? Rashi says. What does Rashi say? Daron, and Milchama. Right? So the first, he says he set up the present. He didn't give it to him yet. Right? Then he set up the davening. And then afterwards, he actually sends the gift. But once he davened, now he can say, okay, once I daven, I have confidence in Hashem is going to help me out. Now I can give him whatever I want because I know Hashem's on my side. Now the last thing we're going to say today before we finish off, which is a really nice idea. Okay, so now he says here, this is the last thing that I happen to like, and you'll see why in a second. So, and the last thing he says, again, in the big meeting between Yaakov and Esav, what does he say? He tells to everyone, make sure to put a revach. Right. So the Baal Turim says there's only 2 times when the word revach is used. Here. Right. Okay. So now. Right. Very good. So here the Baal Turim, exactly that's what the Baal Turim says, and he says, what does he say? So what does Rashi say on revach here? Why does he say put a revach? What does Rashi say? Rashi says put a revach to make it look like even a bigger mincha. Right? So he says, make it look bigger. So what do? You put space, right? What happens when you want to fill a space, right? When you want to look at when you go to an event, right? You make everyone sit in the front, so it looks right. You don't sit in the back. What? Right. Make it look full. Right? We're about to finish. Okay. And he says, so what does he say?
Don't go.
So he says, Revach Vatsalah Yehudim, right? So he says, right. So he says, put a space, right? So what Yaakov says is, he says, make a space, make it look full, right? But he says, I'm making it look full, make it like a big gift. But I have confidence that the real Revach Vatsalah is not going to come from the gift; it's going to come from Makom Acher. Shabbat Shalom.
Well done.
Yeah, bro.
Oh yeah. Hashem Hashem Naseh